Hey everybody, I wanted to let you know that this podcast is brought to you by the one and only Elderwood Academy. Elderwood Academy makes awesome handcrafted gaming products that are the most beautiful things at your table. Everything from these beautiful spell books, which I own, to carry your cards, your dice, your pencils, your miniatures, and anything else, to awesome dice catapults, to amazing deck boxes, to one of my very favorite things, which is the Spell Circle Levitator. It is a floating dice tray. It is so cool. You need to check this thing out. So head on over to elderwoodacademy.com/don't split. That's elderwoodacademy.com/don't split, where you can check out this incredible Spell Circle Levitator and so many more beautiful and practical gaming products. Tell them DSPN sent you. This is Tabletop Babble. I'm James Introcaso. Today on the show, I am talking with Mike Shea of Sly Flourish and Colby Elliot about, you guessed it, the return of the lazy dungeon master. This is Mike's new book that just came out. If you have the first one, you are going to want to pick up the second. If you don't have the first one, that's cool. You can pick up the second without picking up the first one, but you'll probably want that one anyway because it's pretty awesome. This is a great conversation about what it takes to be a lazy DM with Mike and with Colby, the guy who is the narrator of the audiobook version of the book. So here is my conversation with them. Okay, everybody, now I am here with two exciting individuals in the gamosphere of tabletop games. Super excited to have you back, Mike Shea. Who are you and what do you do?
You know, last time I was one of your favorite people.
You are still one of my favorite people.
Okay.
I was trying to give you...
sure. I don't want to know if I got my rank changed or something.
No. If anything, everybody else is less. Boo them.
Oh, sorry, everybody else.
You're the only favorite person. No, I was trying to give you a more lofty intro, but I guess I failed. Here are two epic level individuals. They've both killed Tiamat 20 times. Nice. Mike Shea, welcome back to Tabletop Babble. Who are you and what do you do in the world of tabletop role-playing games?
Who am I? I'm a writer. I write about D&D. I have a website called Sly Flourish and a Twitter handle that's also Sly Flourish, and I write a lot about D&D and run a lot of D&D games.
You know, Mike, the other day, my wife was on Twitter, and she remarked that she had no idea what a big effing deal you are because of your number of followers. And I said, oh, indeed. Mike can change the outcome of D&D. He can shift public opinion with a mere tweet.
The only thing I like is I can put out a poll and get 1,000 responses.
Well, James, I think it was just wasn't it just last week or the episode before where you were talking about the Sly Flourish bump? I mean,
yes,
that is a definite factor, you know.
It is true, right? It's true. When Mike Shea retweets you, you see a lot more hits. It's awesome.
That's so crazy.
I'm
sitting there at like a Starbucks with a coffee in one hand. I'm like, huh, and I hit retweet. And that causes waves.
Exactly. And Colby,
yes, sir.
First time here on Tabletop Babble. Let the people know who you are and what you do in the world of tabletop role-playing games.
Sure. My name is Colby Elliot, and I am a audiobook producer and audiobook narrator, and I specialize in geek lit and nerd lit. So I love doing audiobooks about role-playing games and comic books and science fiction, fantasy, and all of those wonderful things. I write a blog called Geekery and Wine, and I also do an audio blog version of that too, which is up on all of the different podcasting networks. I have a website, lastwordaudio.com, and that has links to all of the different titles that I've done over the past 7 or 8 years. I've got about 27, 28 titles up right now. And I really focus in on the things that are important to the geek and nerd world.
Nice, which is why you're focused on the one and only Mike Shea of Sly Flourish.
Yes.
Very
Exactly.
important to the geek world, of course. And Colby, you are known for, among other things, you did the first Lazy Dungeon Master book, right?
I did. And not only was it one that I did, but I have my Thursday night role-playing group came up and we do a rotation. And as I was coming through and I knew I was coming up on the rotation, I actually went back and re-listened to the book that I had narrated to give myself pointers so that I could be a better DM when I came up for the game. It was a lot of fun.
Nice. That's awesome. That's really funny.
It was a great selection of Tales from the Loop. I don't know if you've played Tales from the Loop, but it's the 80s that never were. It's so much fun.
Yeah, it's very Stranger Things-esque, right?
Exactly, except with super mad science, with robots and whatnot, and there's the dimensional aspect, of course, too. But the super science is it's crazy and off the hook.
That's great. So, Mike, you are here today to talk about Lazy Dungeon Mastering. And first, why don't we give some background about Lazy Dungeon Mastering and why we're talking about this?
Yeah. Somebody, I can't remember. Somebody asked me like, well, when did this start? Like, how did, and I was like, man, I don't remember. Right. Like, I don't remember where it came from. I should know that. Like, I should have like that one day where I was like, setting up, spending 4 hours prepping a 3-hour game is a lot of time. Like, but I don't really have a moment like that. There was sort of a transition after 4th edition where I personally started kind of looking heavily at where I was putting time and thinking like, I don't know that I'm getting the same value for the amount of energy I'm spending. And at the same time, the more story focused RPGs were coming out. We started to see Dungeon World. We started to see, I don't think 13th Age was out yet. And the D&D playtest had just come out. And I think even in those earliest days of the 5e playtest, we kind of saw that it was headed in a different direction than 4th was. And all of those things kind of came together back in, I guess it was 2014. That sounds about right. Something like that. Maybe it might be as far back as 2013. The concept started to solidify and I started to try it out. I said like, okay, like what if could I prep an entire 4-hour game with 3 3x5 cards, and I would experiment and I would say like, what's really matters? Like what parts of this actually matter? And that sort of worked its way. It was my third book on sort of D&D self-help stuff, right? I wrote a book called Sly Flourish's DM Tips and another book called Sly Flourish's Running Epic Tier D&D Games, a title that comes right off the tongue. And so I was used to writing these sort of short books about D&D advice. But I wish I could remember exactly like where the Lazy Dungeon Master came from. Very likely from a time when my wife and I were out for a walk and I was pontificating, some nonsense. And it kind of stuck. And it was very lucky, I think. Like it's a sticky, it's a good hook, and it's a sticky topic. People kind of resonated with it, and I'll claim a little bit of thought in the idea that, well, we're all busy people, especially as we get older, we got kids, and this was sort of before the resurgence of D&D, right? There wasn't this whole like we've seen now, like 5th edition we've seen it double basically twice since then. There was still this idea that like, the Gen Xers are the ones who are primarily playing D&D and they're all busy and they all have kids and they all have jobs. Who the hell has time to spend 4 hours a week prepping a session? So I think that resonated with people too. But then, I'll put a lot of on right place at the right time. That, it was at that early resurgence that the topic fit and it all just kind of fell into place from there. So, James, I've told this story before. It's probably been on the show about how I tried to convince you that podcasting was a bunch of nonsense and that you shouldn't do it. Right. And that is a good track record of how well my advice works in general. That you should almost always be sure not to follow whatever Mike Shea's advice is because, I lead people. And it was almost not exactly the same way with Colby, but it was kind of close because Colby reached out to me and said, hey, I read your book. I think it'd be great to do an audiobook. What do you think? And I'm like, that's, no, that's stupid. Right. Like who wants, no one wants to listen to like an audiobook version of this. But he did a very, very smart thing, which I'm sure he does a lot, which is he sent me a sample, right? And he said, I read the first chapter and I was equally mystified and horrified. Like I was elated and horrified at the same time. I was elated because I was like, holy cow, this guy's really good. Like that voice is awesome. And then horrified at hearing my own words coming from the mouth of a professional. Right. That was so humbling. And I think there's even like in the first book, there was like a little bit of a grammatical weirdness in one of the sentences that was preserved in his recording. And I was like, oh, well, that sentence is horrible. Right. Like, so and the book had been out for a couple of years. So it's not like I'm going to go back and fix it at that point. But that, and so that really worked. And then it really worked out well. Like it was, again, sort of James and you and I've had this relationship too. It was almost, I think it was no work on my part at all. Right. So
Sure.
It's easy to get me to agree to things when I don't actually have to do any work. And luckily that's how it has worked out with Colby. And then Colby, I think you reached out to me, like, I guess about a couple of years ago, right? And said, "Hey, if you're doing anything else like that, I want to do it."
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm like, I'm penciling you in. I don't even know exactly what I'm doing, but I'm penciling you in for it. And which meant that when we were producing the book, I think Colby, I sent you you were the first person aside from Scott Gray, who edited the book, to see the text. And it was well before we'd even gone to design, right? You got the word, like a Word version.
I did. Yeah. It was one of those that as soon as it came in, I just sat down and devoured it. It was,
So I take that back. Like a few people had seen it because I had some readers that I wanted to kind of take a look at it. And James, I think you might've been one too. I don't remember. Which meant that the audiobook was being produced at the same time as the physical books, which was very different from the first one.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And the only scary bit there is I was like, and I told this to Colby, I'm like, it cannot go out on Audible before the backers get it.
Yes.
Like, the backers have to get their due before any version of this book comes out in any other format. But I think the audio version was like ready to go.
Yeah.
I think it was.
Yeah. It was one of those that having done it already before and knowing what our general format was, it just was very almost effortless just because, your writing had, well, like you said, your writing it had improved from the first book to the second book, and
that's all due to the editor.
The editor improved.
Scott Fitzgerald Gray is a legend. Yeah, he's awesome.
It was kind of funny because I walked into there was one night where I walked into my Thursday night role playing group and I said, "Oh, guys, I'm doing this new book and it's so great." And they said, "Well, can you tell us about it?" I said, "No, I can't. We haven't. It's not official. It's not officially public yet. I can't talk to you about it." It's like, "Oh, you can tell us about it." "No, I really can't. But let me just tell you, when it comes out, it is going to be so great, and all of you are going to want it, and it's going to be amazing." So yeah, it was check Kickstarter every day, and you'll find it on there. It's there. It's there. You're going to love it.
That's so fun and super awesome and incredible that you're able to work with a property you really like, So what possessed you, Colby, to say, like, I'm going to prove to Mike that he needs this?
I don't know if I had the chance to even say, like, I think that's a dumb idea. I think that was me in bed, in the morning reading an email. And then it was until I listened to it. So I think, like, Colby, if I recall, did you give me the sample right away? Like, I don't think you...
I did. Yeah. I produced it ahead of time because I said, this just needs to happen.
So I didn't even have a chance to say, man, I think that's dumb. Before I listened to it, it's like, oh my God, we got to do this.
Well, the whole reason why I do audiobooks now is because I started playing D&D when I was 10 years old, and we were, we sit around the table and we're creating characters and story. And that was something that just really resonated, with me, as well as hearing, I think it was Roscoe Lee Brown did this vinyl of the story of Star Wars, and it had all of the soundtrack music in the background and the sound effects, and he was narrating it over the top. And between that and D&D, that was what put me on the path for wanting to create audiobooks and creating these audio worlds. And so it's something that I feel like the world needs more dungeon masters, and more really good dungeon masters, and to show people that they can do it. Because if we have more dungeon masters, we're telling more stories, and more friends are sitting around more tables and getting Cheeto stained fingers and stuff like that. It's amazing. I love it.
I mean, that is what it's all about right there. You clearly have played some role-playing games, my friend. It's a great thing, right? Like, role-playing games are awesome, and I do think one of the things that I know I strive for as an adult is to spend most of my gaming time actually gaming, right? And that's one of the benefits of being a lazy dungeon master, one of the things that I feel like Mike has taught us. So this is, I want to talk to both of you. Mike, I know you wrote the book, but like, Colby, you are deeply involved now in the production of the book and also a fan of this stuff, right? So
Absolutely. And use it all the time.
So like, why be a lazy DM? Are there benefits beyond having more free time, which in itself is a huge benefit? Like, what else comes out of being a lazy DM? Because I do think when I learned to give up some of the prep, I actually got more out of the game, I think, and my games became better. Do you think that that's true, Mike, that for some people, less prep actually equals a better game?
Yeah, I do. I mean, it's hard to say for everybody, but I think that, yeah, I'll give my, there's a wide spectrum of how games work for people. And I don't want to, one of the key things that I put in this book, I have a whole chapter that discounts the book, right? I have a whole chapter that's like, I know I said all this stuff, but your results may vary, right? And you should be cynical about some of the things I say because you want to go check it out for yourself. But I do believe that some of the greatest joys that come from our role-playing games are when things happen that we did not expect. And if we prep a lot, well, we're expecting a lot. If we keep our prep light and focused, we know when we sit down at the table that we don't know where things are going to go, but we're still okay, right? We still have what we need. And we know that things are going to go weird, but we're not going to be completely out of control. And that's why it's not no prep, right? Like, I've had games. I've had games recently where I, like, for whatever circumstance, I just sat down. I'm like, I got nothing. I didn't prep at all, and I'm gonna have to work through this. And that's not much fun either, right? I don't think they're as good, but I do think that over prep is probably the bigger risk, throughout this hobby. I think we feel like we need to prepare more than we do, and some of the most fun happens with things that none of us, including the DM, expected to happen at the table. So yeah, I definitely think that prepping less actually can get to a better game.
Well, for me, I think the core for me is it unshackled my creativity in the ability to take things from other games and then reskin it and put it into my D&D games or even other styles of games. I started one called it's an OSR called Lamentations of the Flame Princess.
Oh yes, I'm familiar.
Yes, but it's very dark and it's very it's got it's a game that almost glowers at you. And I wanted something that could bring some light into that game. So I decided to take Lamentations of the Flame Princess, but that was the game that was being played in a virtual world while the characters themselves were actually part of the Strange from Monty Cook games. So they were existing inside a virtual world that was the Lamentations of the Flame Princess. And knowing that I could basically take an idea from anywhere I wanted to and apply it into my game was really exciting. And so then I decided my current Franken game, I guess you could call it, is I took Amazing Adventures and took all of the OSR aspects of it and put it into the Planescape universe in D&D. And it was really exciting in that I had all of these people who were one character who was a lot like the Shadow, and I had another character who was like a gunslinger. And they went into the Planescape universe, and I expected them to just sort of be the same old murder hobos that would go around just dealing death and stealing treasure. And I asked them at the end of the first session, I said, you guys are really taking it easy on some of the quote unquote monsters. What's going on there? And they went, well, the way that you did this and the way that you put it together, you realize we're heroes. And that's not the way heroes act. And I went, oh, yeah, cool. And all of a sudden we had this whole different game that wasn't just, murder hobos killing all the monsters and stealing their stuff. And it was amazing. I love that aspect of it. So unchaining from the books and taking the ideas where they come, reskinning them and putting them in the game in interesting and nuanced ways, I found it tremendously exciting.
I do think a lot of the advice in The Lazy Dungeon Master goes beyond D&D, and goes to all role-playing games, which is part of the beauty of it. And Mike, I know you don't just play D&D, you play a ton of different role-playing games and have designed for Fate and 13th Age and other role-playing games. So there's just so much to love about this book. And I was a fan of Mike and Mike's work before I got to know the man, who is also really great, just so everybody knows out there. He talks himself down quite a bit, but Mike Shea is an amazing human being, and everyone should know it.
Don't go anywhere. There's more Tabletop Babble coming up.
Hey everybody, I just wanted to take a quick break to let you know this episode of Tabletop Babble is brought to you by Kobold Press, the makers of fine 5th edition D&D products such as the Tome of Beasts, the Creature Codex, and now Courts of the Shadow Fae. Intrigue and adventure await you in the Shadow Realm with Courts of the Shadow Fae, a 5th edition planar adventure for 7th to 10th level characters. Designed by Wolfgang Bauer and incredible game designer Dan Dillon, Courts of the Shadow Fae pits your heroes against the Queen of Night and Magic when she announces that the city of Zobek and its people are hers by ancient right. To save the city, you'll need to confront the Shadow Fae in the heart of their own realm. This 148-page adventure contains 100 NPCs, a map with more than 60 locations, and more than 40 combat and role-playing encounters. Raise your status through courtly intrigue and duels of honor to win an audience with the queen herself and free the city, or fail and become her servants. Order Courts of the Shadow Fae for 5th edition at koboldpress.com. That's koboldpress.com. Tell them DSPN sent you.
All right, back to the show.
So my big question here is when is it time to be lazy and when is it time to work? Because I think my problem is that I am afraid that I am going to focus on the wrong thing, and then I try to focus on everything, right? And I'm like, but if I don't do this, and what if they do this, and what if I don't have this ready to go? What about this, and this? I think people can get into their own heads. So when is it time to be lazy, and when is it time to work hard?
So in your kind of example there of sort of the decision trees and getting lost in among the decision trees, I think even thinking about them like decision trees is where we can get off the rails. Like if we kind of feel like, in an interaction with an NPC, I'm playing Planescape Torment right now. I got the enhanced edition for my PC and I'm kind of playing through it. And I note that I'm seeing the decision trees that are going on in there. And it's like, have I exhausted all of the things that this character can say by clicking on all of the right responses, and it's because in the game, there's only so many, but in our games that the idea that there'll be a decision tree when you talk to a character is, we don't need that. We can sort of, and it's a little bit metaphysical, we can become that character, and we know what the character wants and we know how they behave, and then we just respond. Right. So we don't need to know what are the 5 ways that this conversation could go. We can just be the character and see where it goes. Particularly when we're talking about NPCs, and there's lots of different ways to do NPCs. And I promote one way in the book, but there's many different ways, and who am I to say that Matt Mercer's doing his NPCs wrong? Right. But the approach we say in here, the one I take and the one when I talk about is the idea of make sure you know what their name is. And in particular, the only other one that I really use regularly is what's a character in popular fiction that I'm going to wrap around this NPC. Usually with the rest of the game, you kind of understand what's their general motivation. So, before the show, we were talking about the TV show Cadfile, this old BBC show about a monk who goes on, investigates murders back after the Crusades. Right? He's like a fantastic character to throw into your D&D game. I always like the trick, and James, I think you brought this one up too, of switching the gender of an NPC. So, if we look at Cadfile, we say, what about a female monk who investigates murders, and she could be the kind of quest giver in a story. Well, then I immediately know what to act like. I immediately know what that character is going to be like. I even have a background. It's like, oh, so she's a monk now, but she used to be a former crusader, and she kind of got, the blood got too thick around her feet, and she quit, and now she's, kind of a monk or a priest. That's real easy to do, right? And it's and you get so much of the edges are kind of filled in without having to spend a lot of time. Like, I didn't sit and roll on 12 charts about what the different personality types are. I already have it all, right? I have it all because I picked one guy. And no one, generally speaking, even my wife, who I watched the show with, she's not going to know that that's Cadfile, right? She's going to be like, wow, that guy's that lady's really a rich NPC. I like her, right? And not ever realize that I stole it from every show that we watch, unless I say it.
Here's an interesting bit of trivia. When you're making audiobooks, you do the same thing with your characters too. You might say, oh, you know what? I'll go through and I'll cast the audiobook with different, but the thing is the impersonation that I'm doing is so imperfect that, like you say, that person that's listening doesn't necessarily know that I'm doing a particular actor. It's like he's doing Ethan Hawke. Well, Ethan Hawke doesn't have a very distinctive sound, but if I can put him in the audiobook that way, they never know.
Yeah, and so there's some interesting research. I'm straying a little bit from the question, but I'll get back to it, James. Someday I'll get back there. There's some interesting research about how what we have in our heads. We assume that the things that we have in our heads are in the heads of like people that we're with, and they did this research where they said put like a very popular song in your head, and then tap out the rhythm of that song. And the other person has to guess what the song is. And you think like there's a 90% chance they're going to figure out that was, a Beatles song. And it's almost zero that they're going to get it, right? But we think they will. Like, how can you not know that was, She Loves Me? Like, how hard is She Loves Me, right? And I think it's the same way with this, that like in our heads, it's so obvious it's this character, but no one else has any idea. So it's a great trick. So on the idea of prepping too much, I think if we are drawing out a flow chart of potential decisions that are taking place, to me, that feels like we're probably, we are analog creatures. We don't have to have a decision tree. We can let the dice figure things out for us sometimes, or we can, kind of we can act like it's a normal conversation that can go in a strange direction if things get weird without having to have that mapped out in a flow. As far as where to spend time, I think, secrets of the 8 steps that are in return. I think the step that probably takes the longest and offers the most benefit is probably the defining secrets and clues, where during prep time, you write down 10 things that the characters could discover in the next session of the game. And it really makes you think about the game hard. It's usually hard to come up with 10, like 10's kind of a lot, but you get some of your best ones. I get some of my best ones, like on those last 3. Because I get rid of all the easy ones up front. And then it's like, okay, now these last 3 are hard. And it really stretches my brain. So that, I've been I've been recording my session prep for my weekend games on Twitch. And I can kind of go back and study it. And like that is the hardest. Like the other stuff is pretty quick. That stuff takes a little bit longer. But the other thing I think, and sort of getting back to sort of the more traditional, almost 4E and 3.5 style, I think boss fights take time and should take time to prep. I'm not happy with boss fights. I've never been happy with them. And all the time I played D&D, every boss fight I run, I'm like, I forgot about that thing. I forgot that the Beholder has that one eye ray.
Yeah, I want to bring you back to talk about boss fights because I have the same issue. They're either too hard or...
Yeah, I can never get them right.
There was an element, though, that you mentioned before about the things that you can add on the fly to talk to that point that James is mentioning there. Shifting on the fly and getting that boss a little bit to involve the environment to make that boss a little bit more powerful because they're on their home turf, and making it so that bad things might happen to the boss to make it a little bit easier and whatnot. There's a lot of play in there too with the boss fights. I've had a similar problem. Another thing that I've noticed about this that I think even players would benefit from reading The Lazy Dungeon Master, because
No, they'll get all our secrets.
no. But here's the thing.
They'll know. They'll know we're just charlatans.
But
You can't do that.
But
they have to think we're really working hard.
But here's the thing. That element of yes and that is part of improvisational theater. I start to see it when I'm not the dungeon master. I'll see where that dungeon master's going, and I'll see, oh, wait, if my character chooses this direction, that could be really interesting. And I think he has some ideas that direction. And you'll start to play that character to make the story more interesting. It becomes this thing that you're doing together. And there's not this, well, and you mentioned this before too, there should not be an adversarial relationship between, the players and the dungeon master. They're not competing against one another. You want them to do cool stuff as the dungeon master. And at the same time, I look at that, at the game master up there, and I say, you know what can I do to make his story more cool? What turn of my character will develop conflict in an interesting way so that he has more to play with? Instead of having, okay, I'm the character who is always going to poke the door with a 10-foot pole, listen at the door before I open it, and all of these super careful things that just aren't very interesting if you were to see it in a film. Yeah. So how can I enhance his story by providing him more fodder for the storyline?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's so true, and there's a lot going on if you can have a base, right? I think that's really what we're talking about is you don't need to, if I may make a bad metaphor here, right? If you're building a house, right, your players are coming over to build that house with you. What you need to make sure is that you've laid the foundation and you have the supplies for them to do that, right? And being a lazy dungeon master is about, thinking about, okay, what are the things that we need to play in this world? And, oh, look, I created some characters. I don't need to create every single thing they're going to say, but I have some ideas of what they're going to do and what their personality is like and that sort of thing. And I think it's great when you can hand over some of that control to the players for two reasons. The first is that, it takes some of the work off your plate and they surprise you. But then the other one is that they love to do it, right? So many players get so surprised, and I feel like I'm Tom Sawyer getting the kids to paint the fence whenever I do that, right?
I have the players run the initiative. I have a whiteboard where they'll copy down the initiative order, and that is just one less thing that I have to worry about when I'm behind the screen, which is really, really nice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. So, Mike, this is the return of the Lazy Dungeon Master. What is new in this book?
I would say the number one thing, the secrets that I mentioned before, was actually the reason that I wrote a new book. It was one thing that I kind of picked up pretty shortly after I wrote the first one, and realized, like, I didn't really have I didn't really define it well at first, and then I started using it more and more, and I started realizing that many times that's all I did, and so part of it was like, well, the book, I still believed heavily in the philosophy of the book, but I did feel like there was this one missing thing. I even wrote a Sly Flourish article called the lost chapter of The Lazy Dungeon Master, which is about secrets. Always wanted to go back. The other thing was I had no idea how popular that book was going to be. And it did, lots of people loved it. And I, like the best month of sales that I ever had for that book was the month right before I launched the Kickstarter for the new one. And that freaked me out a little bit because I think I might break this, what if they hate both of them after this? And so it was popular, but I always felt like it deserved a little more than I gave it back then, right? Like I didn't know, I was writing these books. The process was much, slimmer back then. And I had just finished Fantastic Adventures the year before. So I could, use some of the profits from that to sort of seed the beginning of this. And I could really, kind of pour myself into this one a lot and give it even more attention. Like I didn't want to kill the old book either. And I don't think it did. Like both books are still good. They're different. They work well together. Lots of people who backed the Kickstarter bought the original because I gave the backers a discount on the original. I wasn't planning on it, but people were like, could you do that? And I was like, I guess, like I'm making a new one. Like, why do you want the old one? But okay. And so lots of people got it. And I do think that they work well together, but I really wanted to as we've said on our other show, dive deep into this topic even more so than I think I did in Lazy Dungeon Master.
Mike, was the Grim Portents, was that a new concept for the second one?
I don't think that was in the first one, but that idea comes from Dungeon World and Apocalypse World.
Yeah, I love that because it really gets the players moving forward.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And again, I think like we love structure, and I think one of the reasons why this book has done well, and that the old one did well, is because it offered structure for something that is generally unstructured, right? Like the Dungeon Master's Guide does not really give you here's step one. And Dungeon World does. Like I when I was talking to the fellow who made Dungeon World, Adam Coble, I kind of referred to it as an opinionated RPG because it says here's how you prep. Right, here's how your game works, right? Session 1, you don't have anything and you see what the hell the characters do. Session 2, you write down what they did and then you build a campaign around it. I think people want that structure desperately. And even offering, one variant saying look, this isn't everybody's structure and I doubt anybody uses it exactly the same way, but here's something to do. Here's just some steps. I think people really resonate with that idea. And so I think they resonated with it. I did with Dungeon World. And so did Mike Mearls. Mike Mearls wrote about how the idea of fronts for developing sort of villains or major events that are going on in a campaign, that it changed Mike Mearls' game. And that was during the development of 5th. So you can kind of see some of the stuff from Dungeon World that bled into 5th. And then who would I be to not, kind of include those things that worked really well as part of the ideas for Return.
Well, and you force the players into, you need to make the conscious choice to be a hero because these elements
these things are happening.
These are happening regardless of what you do. You might want to make the choice to be the hero to save the day.
Yeah, and I think I say it in the book too. There's a bit of a danger too, because in many cases there's multiple fronts going on at the same time, and it's you're kind of screwed because with every front you face, 2 others are moving forward. That you can't, and it's like whack-a-mole. So you want to be a little careful. When I ran a campaign like that, and I remember one of my players who I've played with for many years said to me, she said, I always felt like I wanted to have these open sandbox, lots of different things going on adventures until I ran yours, and now I realize I hate it. Right, and her point was it was a great campaign and everybody had fun and they saved the day at the end. But they did feel there's no right choice. I want to know which villain I should go after. And knowing that there's this lich who's bringing his stuff back and there's a witch queen over here and she's bringing her stuff back. And then there's this corrupt mage in the city who's going to wreck it. If we go and take care of the lich, we're going to come back and the city's going to hate us because this guy will have, won the election. And, so I in other campaigns, I've pulled back from that and said, you can actually deal with all of these, right? They will be moving forward, but not so much that you can't have an impact on them if you switch from one to the other. But it can be tricky.
Yeah, for sure. It can be tricky. I think there's a lot of awesome stuff, including the workbook is something that I want to talk about. So what is the workbook and why did you think that it should be included?
What I actually wanted, and was Colby to do an audiobook version of the workbook, so we could just hear him say one word at a time. So he could just read out
listing,
hit points,
absolutely.
40, 110, 150. That would be awesome.
Everybody loves a good narrated list.
Nothing like reading the table
is the best. That's right. Yeah, that's my Freebird
madness.
Right there.
That's your Freebird. That's Freebird. I think you and I had that conversation about the original, right?
We did.
The original
yes.
book had so in the first Lazy Dungeon Master, a good piece of the book were tables and lists of 20 things. And Colby and I kind of talked about what the hell do we do? Reading these lists are not useful. You're not going to roll. You can't roll on an audiobook, right?
That's right.
And no one's going to remember what the third one was by the time you're on the 8th. So what we figured out is in Audible, you can actually make a PDF that has the charts separate. So you can read the parts that you read and then the charts are separate. And then luckily for Colby and for me, that it was 2 books in this case. So the first book was just talk, just text, prose. And then this book is all about all the things that I would want on a Dungeon Master screen that isn't typically on a Dungeon Master screen.
The list of fantasy names is hugely important, I gotta say.
Yeah, everybody. That's like the number one. So this, I actually did some research into this. It's like number one improvisational tool is a good list of names. Like everybody has one. They all have their favorite. I put one in here, that works for me. Sometimes I think you can get paralyzed by having too many. This one has a lot. Like this has a page, and I think, it's like 300 first names and last names on this thing. And I love mixing two words together to make second ones like fell belly and leaf hound and worm beard.
Right.
Know?
Yeah. I mean, that's classic fantasy right there.
Yeah, right. But that could be overdone too. So you don't want to do that all the time.
The unintentional comedy that can happen when you don't.
Yeah, right. Oh, the bad ones are great. The bad ones are a lot of fun.
We had a bad one where we were doing this science fiction. We were going around this planet and trying to talk to all these different settlements. And this guard came up to us and said, well, what's his name? And he hadn't thought about it. And he says, he's just average. So average Johnson. And I said, wait, Average Johnson? And he said, yes. And I said,
Average Johnson.
Average Johnson. Yep.
That's an awesome
there
name.
was a whole 15-minute riff on the different people within the Johnson family. And and of course some of it went a little bit on the blue side, of course, and some of it was just and there is this digression that's just like, okay, so if you were trying to tell a story, the last 15 minutes were just us riffing on the fact that you didn't think of a name for this guy at the garden.
On names. Oh,
it is.
That's the fun of D&D right there.
Everyone else had a name after that, believe it or not, in the campaign. It was strangely enough, he came up with everyone else's name after that.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, I do think names are one of the hardest things. I, as a DM, can create a PC that I feel like is fully fleshed out, NPC on the spot, ready to go, has a voice, has goals, all that kind of stuff. And then when the players ask what the name is, it's like, blue lamp. And
then of course somebody says something to the effect of, hey, wasn't the last gnome we met named Blue Lamp too?
Yeah. Yeah, wasn't that Blue Lamp too?
Exactly.
Yeah, they're all from the same family. Shut up. You want to get over here and run this game?
So let me ask you, gentlemen, what's next for the Sly Flourish Empire?
Oh man.
Yeah, Colby, what would you like to see Mike do next?
I want Colby to tell me.
The return of the lazy dungeon master.
Well, no, I think we have to go thematically. We have to go the lazy dungeon master strikes back, I think is what we've got to do it.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, we had all these names. Trust me, my wife and I had a giant list of names. And they all, every Star Wars and, Lord of the Rings title was well played out before we... I mean, so part of me is hoping I never have to write this book again. Right? Like, I kind of hope that I hit the mark and that... Although I tell you, like, this kind of book is easy for me to write. Like, I'm used to, I've got 10 years writing this kind of stuff on Sly Flourish. I took one of the nice things because Fantastic Adventures did well. I took an entire month off from work to write this one. Like, I'd kind of prepped a little bit. I had an outline and stuff, but I didn't know exactly how it was going to work out. And I said, okay, so I'm going to take a month where I just put on my Hawaiian shirt and go to Starbucks or the mall or wherever and write. And I finished the book in 2 weeks, and the first draft of it in 2 weeks. And it was easy, right? And it's like, and part of it's like, I've been thinking about it forever. So it's all in my head. I just got to get it down on paper. But so, writing more of this stuff isn't bad, but I kind of don't want to saturate the topic. Like, I'm hoping that this is it, I'm hoping, who knows, like, the world changes.
But there may be something else that just, if it hits Mike like a bolt of lightning, it's like, this is a direction of something we want to address. I mean, I can't wait for whatever the next project that we do together, as long as it's something that, tabletop role players can take and go, yes, this is something that I can make a great game with, or I'm just excited. Whatever we do next is going to be great.
Yeah. So I am working on another one. I don't know how it will translate to audio, but sorry, Colby. I think the only hint I'll give, James, I think you already know, but the only hint I'll give is that Fantastic Adventures did well, and I think that of all of the areas, if we look at the entire sphere of the kind of stuff that's getting produced for D&D and the kind of stuff that is well used. There are areas that I feel I'm probably wrong because, like I said before, my advice is nonsense and my prediction skills are terrible. But like, there's areas where I feel like we're saturated is probably too strong. There's plenty of material in certain areas. Like I don't feel like Mike Shea needs to come out with a campaign setting, right? Like there are so many great campaign settings, and the truth is most people want their own anyway. So that to me is an area I wouldn't call it a campaign. I would take umbrage if people called it a campaign setting. Like there's no world, there's no, there's a town and a bunch of bad things happening around the town, right? A town with a hand sticking out of it. So yeah, like that to me, the design of that was so that you had your game world, or you could fit it anywhere. And I've had people where they threw that in the Forgotten Realms, or they threw it in, whatever their home game world was, because it's just a town. It isn't like a whole, it's hard to write those because it's like, I never want to define any of the gods. So I say like the god of light or the god of shadow, right? And it's like, I assume your mythos has one. Who doesn't have a god of light and god of shadow in their game? So, add your own here, right? And tailor it for you. And I feel like that, I feel like that's an area where it's a mixture of, it's fun to write, and I like writing that stuff, and I think it is popular enough to fund itself, certainly, and is useful. Like people will actually take that off the shelf and run with it. And I feel like there's lots of other areas, and I don't bash the people who go into those areas. Like there are plenty of monster books, right? But I feel like I've got 5 books on my shelf, including 2 that Mr. James Introcaso wrote for, Creature Codex and Tome of Beasts, right? I've got, how many across Mordenkainen's, Volo's, the Monster Manual, the Tome of Beasts, and the Creature Codex, that's like 1,500 monsters, right? Like I can't find one that's not in there. There's got, especially with reskinning, like with reskinning, I'm not sure I need any. I need the ogre. Like I need like 3 monsters and I can reskin them into anything. So, so that's an area. The only one I felt strongly about was vampires. And I wrote a little supplement, myself and Chris Sims. I wrote a little supplement about vampires because I was kind of unhappy with how 5e vampires came out. You can get that for free on Sly Flourish. You don't have to buy it. It's out there, fully edited, all well designed, all well developed. So there's areas where I feel like, other people have this handled and I'm not going to go there. And campaign settings are one. Systems, I think everybody has, anybody that's been playing these games for any length of time, somewhere in their hard drive is their RPG, right? Where they're like, this, I'm going to do it and it's going to be right. I'm going to do it and we're not going to have any clerics because clerics are dumb, right? And so I've got my version of that, which is a little RPG. And I actually released a small one called Dungeons of Fate, which is based on Fate, but feels like D&D. And, it doesn't really have a perfect place in the market because it's like, well, between Dungeon World and Fate, there's, plenty. That is also an area I'm probably not going to go. So, probably the next thing you'll see from me is another book of adventures because I like writing them. That was the longest answer to your question.
I would love to see another book of adventures. So, so warm up the pipes. All right, Colby?
Will do. I'm absolutely in.
And Colby, what's next for you?
Well, on about mid-February, I have a second book of essays called Shoot That One by Javier Grillo Marxwatch. He's a gentleman who created a TV show called The Middleman, and he was also a writer-producer on Lost and has worked on The 100 and is currently writing for the prequel for The Dark Crystal as well as the live-action version of Cowboy Bebop. And he has done this collection of essays about Star Wars and Star Trek and comic books and life, and also how to run a TV show in a humane and interesting way. And it's just really cool stuff. And so we've got that book's going to be coming out in mid-February, but then we'll have a free essay that's going to be coming out on that called The 11 Laws of Show Running. That'll be coming out here in a couple of weeks. That'll be available on his podcast called Children of Tendu, and then also on my audio blog called Geekery and Wine. So that should be a fun one. He's an amazing creative. Just talking with him he blows my mind.
So if people want to get in touch with you or see what you're doing, Mike, where should they go and what should they do?
So seeing what I'm doing, slyflourish.com is the best place to do that. And to get in touch with me, Twitter, twitter.com/slyflourish, all one word. I'm pretty active and responsive there.
Excellent. And how about you, Colby? Where should people go and what should they do?
I am on lastwordaudio.com. You can also look for my books on Audible under Colby Elliot. The audio blog is called Geekery and Wine, and then the written blog, which is the same but in the written format for those that like the printed word, is at geekeryandwine.blogspot.com. And on Twitter, I'm at Colby Elliot.
Colby, can I have a question for Colby?
Yeah.
Do you have a book recommendation?
Of course, man. Sure. One of my favorites is Will Wheaton narrates Ready Player One. And for me, the book itself is perfect in so many ways because it covers, the Tomb of Horrors and Zork and all of these things that when I first read and listened to that book, I thought this book was written for me. He actually came over to my house, looked into if I had like the little fuzzy journal with the lock on it, he looked inside there and got all these ideas and made this for me. And Will Wheaton just does a wonderful job with it. It's really amazing.
It's a good one. How about one I haven't read?
Oh, jeez. Are you a fan of urban fantasy?
Sure.
Okay, then I would say Ben Aronovich's Rivers of London, which is narrated by Cobna Holbrook-Smith. And he is an amazing narrator that has this ear for all of these wonderful UK accents and also African accents, the different countries in Africa. He just absolutely nails it all. And if you want to picture what he looks like, he was one of the lawyers in the new Mary Poppins Returns. Yeah, it's really great. But he's also an amazing audiobook narrator. So yes, Rivers of London series. It starts off with Midnight Riot by Ben Aronovich. Is just fantastic.
Well, thank you both so much for joining me today on Tabletop Babble. I really, really appreciate it. Y'all are great. That was great. I always love talking with Mike, and meeting Colby was pretty awesome too. People, if you want other people to hear these conversations, you should head on over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star review. If you do, I'll read your review out loud, and you can make me say anything you want, like Travis Legg. Yes, that's right. The one, the only, the master game designer, Travis Legg, who left a review entitled A Great Listen. James is a wonderful host, and the show is a blast. Informative, fun, and cool. At Travis Legg, pretty much everywhere on social media. Well, thanks, Travis. I really appreciate it. People, you should really go check out Travis's stuff. He's got a ton of great offerings on DM's Guild. That's Travis Legg, Legge. Go check him out. All right, people, one other thing I wanted to let you know. I have another podcast on the Don't Split the Podcast Network. It's called The Demon Plague. It's an actual play 5th edition podcast that I am running. And what am I running? Well, I am running The Demon Plague. It is a 5th edition D&D adventure that I wrote with John Four. It takes characters from levels 1 through 20, and we are having a blast. The episodes are awesome. They're hour long, real easy to hit and listen to. There's one coming out every single week. The cast is amazing. Rudy Basso, Lauren Urban, TK Johnson, and Robert Aducci, and we're having some great guests show up. You can find it all at don'tsplitthepodcastnetwork.com. And you can find me on social media at James Introcaso, and you can find me on worldbuilderblog.com. Tabletop Babble is a show on the Don't Split the Podcast Network. Thanks to Rudy Basso for founding it with me. Our theme music, which you're listening to right now, was provided by BattleBards. Don't forget that RPGs are like sex. It's impolite to fart during it.
Hey there, listeners. It's Shane.
And Ishan, your hosts from the Total Party Thrill podcast, the newest addition to the Don't Split the Podcast network.
We talk topics that help you, dear listener, create and play better RPG games.
We have a back catalog of more than 150 weekly episodes.
And we got nominated for an Emmy for episode 11, Social Contracts.
In episode 154, we talked about crossing the moral event horizon. How evil is too evil?
We also recap our home games, like the 40k Rogue Trader campaign, Dynasty Unwarranted.
But that's mainly just you trying to kill us all. In your defense, our characters are greedy idiots.
Don't forget the 3 years we spent in Eberron playing Morning Glory, your 5th edition D&D campaign.
We also review new RPGs and books, and every episode we build a 5th edition D&D character in the Character Creation Forge.
You might check out the Pint-Sized Punisher from episode 119, a halfling with a bad attitude, and 14 levels of Barbarian.
So to recap, Total Party Thrill, RPG advice, campaign recaps, and D&D characters built by your dashing hosts every single week.
What more could you possibly want?
To get back to the actual show?
Oh yeah, let me just hit this button, and here you go.